Hi, hello, vanakkam, and welcome back to yet another episode on Little's Law YouTube channel. So, we have discussed about the very basics of Dynatrace in our previous video. So, in this video, we will see about one of the main purpose or one of the main metric that we observe or we use to analyze in the performance testing. So while we run a test, we used to check this metric which will help us to understand the performance of the application. So in case if the application is not good or if the application is not performing well or if the responses are too high, so we will see this particular metric and we'll find how does it work. So in case if there are any issues, then we will go for any recommendations. So before we see what is the metric and how to monitor the metric, this is me, Vasan Shanmugam. I welcome you all to Little Slaw YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you have not subscribed yet. Like and share the video with your friends. So the metric that we are going to see today is the CPU utilization. So I will show you step by step on how to build the query. So first I'm searching for the CPU here and let me search the CPU usage percentage, and when I click on enter, so here you can find the CPU usage. So I'm favoriting I'm clicking on this favorite button so that anytime when I come back to this screen, this will be on top of the list. So here you can see this will be this particular CPU usage metric will be on top of your metric list. So you don't need to just search for it every time. So now if I click on this CPU usage metric, so let me click on create chart. So when you want to do more filtering or when you want to view more details, just click on this create chart, which will take you to this page. And here on the top here there are like different ways of explaining the data. So you can see that through a graph, you can see that through a stacked column, you can see that through a stacked area, and you can even use the pie chart. So now I'm going to use the graph. So this is the most common and this is more of a graphical user interface is very good when comparing with all other charts. So I'm choosing the graph. And the next thing is I'm going to, so here you can see the primary metric is CPU usage percentage, and now the second option or the second thing is going to be the aggregation. So I'm choosing average as the aggregation. So here you can see the average resource utilization or the average percentage of CPU that has been used during the entire test. And before that, you would have noticed in my previous video we saw about the time frame. So here I'm choosing the last 6 hours of duration. So almost 30% or close to 27% is the average CPU utilization for the last 6 hours. So the next thing is I'm going to select. So in fact we have various other aggregations. We have average, we have maximum, and then we have the minimum, and then we have the percentile 90th. So we will choose or we will go with average, and then the next component is going to be split by. So here I'm choosing the split by, and under split by I have to choose by host. So I'm going to split the metrics based on the host. And the second, so there is one more thing. So when I change to maximum here, you cannot see any changes in this value. It's because I haven't run the query. So if I run the query, automatically you can see the differences here. So let me just disable this, and here you can see, so the maximum utilization has went up to 70 percentage, right? So when you are changing any of the components here, just make sure you run the query so that you can see the differences. You can see here the lowest percentage, the minimum percentage is around 2%. So let me change it back to average, and I'm running the query again. So here you can see the average response, the average CPU percentage utilization is around 27 percentage, and then when I go to the split by, I'm splitting them by host. So I run the query, and here you can see there are like different hosts, and each host has its own level of average CPU utilization. And then the next part is I'm going to filter this. So let me choose filter by, and again I'm choosing the host, the OS type. So I'm choosing the OS type, which is going to be Linux. So I'm going to see the CPU percentage, the CPU usage percentage in the average aggregation, and I'm going to split them by host, which I'm going to filter it through the OS type as Linux. So when I click on run query, here you can see there are different levels for each host. They were distributed across each of them. So even we have one more component, which is the rate. So in fact, if you have to see the rate of the CPU percentage by per second or per minute or per hour, even we can choose them. So this can only be used with a count metric and a space aggregation other than auto. So in case if you want to use this, so we can use a count metric. Let me just check for that. So here it's not available for now. So let's just close it out and let me click on run query. So this is the latest one. So let me just explain you. I'll take you through the metrics and chart for this particular graph here. So this space aggregation which you see here on the top, which is the CPU percentage. So this enables us to specify how the resulting data points of a metric query are supposed to be aggregated across dimensions. So the query will always provide statistically more accurate results for a given query, even if certain metrics provide different statistics, which are depending on the nature of each metric. And to change this metric, we can select one from the list immediately following the metric name in the query order. So for example, if we want to choose the metric order to be auto, or we can, if I click on auto, automatically the values will get changed. In case if I want to choose it to average, so automatically the values will get changed based on that. And then when it comes to the split by, so when it comes to the next component, which is the split by, so by default when we run a query in Dynatrace, it does not split the data by any specific dimensions. But what if we want to analyze the metric based on different dimensions such as the host or the application? So that's where the split by feature comes in handy. So to bring in or to add this split by, so first we have to make sure that we are in the query editor, and if we can't see the split by option, we will have to click on the select button, and from the drop down list we can choose the split by. So for example, you can click on this and you can choose the select split by, and then we can add the host option. So once we have selected the split by, a new option will appear. So here you can see a new option has appeared where we selected the host. So we need to set the dimension by which we want to split our query. For example, let's say we have a matrix showing the CPU usage percentage and we want to split the data based on different host. So simply choose host from the split by option and we are all set. So the tool will now use the selected aggregation for each individual host, giving us a more detailed analysis. And then the next component, which is the sort by, so which you can see here. So let me uncheck it, and then if I click on it, so you can see the sort by has been added. So when we run a query in Dynatrace, the results are displayed in descending by default. So here you can see the descending order is based on the chosen aggregation and it is by default. So but if we want to change the order, for example, if we want to get it from ascending, and when I click on the run query, automatically the values has been sorted based on the ascending order. So we will get the option of value or by host. So if I click on descending order and I click on run, so automatically you can see there is a difference when it comes to descending order when I sort by host, and when I choose ascending and when I click on run query, automatically the values will get changed. So this is how we can choose, we can sort the values either by value, or we can sort the results based on the host. So same way, there are other options of filtering the host OS type by Linux, or even if we have any other OS setup, OS type that has been set up, then we can choose that particular OS type. Either it can be Windows or Linux or any other operating systems. And then the rate, so we can either choose by second, minute, or hour. And then there is another option where we can duplicate. So here you could see I have created a duplicate window here. So using this I can create another. So for example, I can just choose any of the other CPU. For example, I can just go and choose the idle, and when I run the query, so I have not make any other changes. Let me just go and select the average, and then let me click split by host, and the value is sort by host, and then it is going to be let me change it to ascending, and then the filter is by host, and then the OS type, let me choose the OS type, that is going to be Linux. So I have just duplicated the same set here, but the first graph is going to be CPU usage percentage, and then the second is going to be CPU idle. And when I run the query, so here you could see there are the CPU usage percentage on the top, and then we have the CPU idle percentage. So these are the same set of queries. Like for example, these first two, CPU usage percentage and the CPU idle, are for the same server. So here you can see at the bottom the CPU percentage is here, and at the other end the CPU idle percentage is opposite to it. So the CPU usage percentage minus the whole CPU percentage, or the whole CPU capacity, is the CPU idle. So CPU usage percentage is something that the CPU is used. So for example, if 30% of CPU is being utilized during the load test, so which means the CPU usage percentage is 30% on average. What about the CPU idle? So that is 100 percentage minus the CPU usage percentage is the CPU idle percentage. So in that way you can understand how well the CPU has been utilized. So if the idle, if the CPU idle percentage is very less, that means the CPU usage has been very high. On the other hand, if the CPU idle percentage is very high, then the CPU usage percentage is very less. So in that way you can correlate those values. So we will discuss. So now I will take you through some of the common signs or common symptoms that there is a performance bottleneck with the CPU utilization. So the very first thing is there will be a clear indication of a CPU bottleneck is when we see the CPU usage is consistently hovering close to 100%. So now this is around to 24 to 20, around less than 35%. But in case if the CPU usage is consistently hovering close to 100%, and even that is happening during normal workloads, so that will suggest you that the CPU is operating at its maximum capacity and maybe struggling to handle additional tasks. It cannot handle any additional task efficiently. So that is the very first symptom. So if the CPU percentage, the CPU usage percentage is close to 100%, which means the CPU is operating at its maximum capacity. So coming to the second symptom or the second sign, so the CPU spikes during load. So for example, during peak hours or during the time when you are executing a heavy workload load test, and if you notice sudden burst of CPU usage, it could mean that the CPU is facing challenges keeping up with the increased demand, and these spikes can lead to performance degradation. So again, I will tell you again what happens is like when you are executing a peak user load, or when there is high load in the system, and if you notice sudden burst, so sudden burst in the sense if there is a sudden increase of CPU usage, it could mean that the CPU is facing challenges that it cannot keep up, or it cannot handle the increased demand. So these spikes will definitely lead to performance degradation. That is, the response times may be high, or the response times or the page will be not loading. So these are some of the performance issues in case if your CPU spikes during the load. And then the third signature, the third symptom is the CPU saturation during specific operations. So for example, when certain operations of tasks that cause the CPU usage to spike dramatically. So it indicates that those tasks are CPU intensive and may be contributing to the bottlenecks. And there are, for examples, like if you are opening your application or if there are any database intensive or like more CPU intensive activities is happening. So during those situations, your CPU will get saturated, and that indicates that there is some bottleneck in the CPU percentage. And then when it comes to the fourth signature or the fourth sign or the fourth symptom, so high CPU usage with low throughput. So if the CPU usage is consistently high, but the throughput or the process request per second remains low, that indicates that the CPU is becoming a limiting factor in processing task. So in that scenario, we can understand that there is some issues with the bottleneck or issues with the CPU. That's bottleneck, and there is an issue with the CPU. And then coming to the symptoms 5, which is the long response time. So some scenarios, the CPU bottlenecks can lead to increased response times for applications and services. So if user experience delays in receiving the responses, it could be due to the overwhelmed CPU resource. So this is another common CPU bottleneck, that every time when there is an increased response time for any of the applications or any of the services or any of the background services that are running, so if the user experiences delays in receiving the response, it could be due to the overwhelmed CPU resources. That is, most of the CPU resources are being occupied and they are being utilized by these actions or these activities. And then when it comes to the next symptom, which is the CPU queuing. So if the CPU usage graph shows period of queuing, so in this graph, if you see that there are like queuing, that there are signs of queuing, or if you can see some periods of queuing where tasks are waiting in a queue to be processed, that suggests that the CPU is contending with too many tasks, which can definitely cause the bottleneck. And then the next symptom is reduced CPU performance during load test. So during load test, if we observe that the performance degradations as the load increases, it's a strong indication of the CPU bottlenecks affecting the system. So for example, we are launching an application. So to ensure the application stability and performance under heavy load, we conduct a comprehensive load test. And during the initial load testing, the application starts with a moderate number of concurrent users, and the application performs smoothly, responds to user requests without any delays. However, as we are increasing the load gradually, it seems that the application response times are starting to slow down as we increase the number of concurrent users. And the development team is noticing this. So that is, beyond a certain point, the application performance is diminishing and the response times are keep on increasing. So looking at the CPU usage graph, it is steadily climbing as the load increases, but beyond a specific threshold. So the response times start to degrade. So for example, here you can see there is no increase or there is no decrease, like they are they have keep on surviving at a certain percentage. But in this scenario, at a certain point of time, there is a steady climbing of the CPU usage as the load increases, and that goes even beyond a specific threshold. For example, if it goes beyond 80% or 90%, the response time will start to degrade. So the CPU graph will tell you that the CPU is working harder to handle the increased load. So that is the reason we are monitoring the CPU during the load test. So as the concurrent user counts keeps growing, the CPU begins to hit its maximum capacity. And this appears that we are experiencing CPU bottlenecks and the CPU is struggling to keep up with the increasing number of requests, which leads to performance degradation. And to address the CPU bottleneck, the development team has to optimize the application code and they have to focus on reducing the CPU intensive operations and by improving the resource utilization. So this is one way where we can effectively use the CPU graph. So we'll move on to the next symptom. So in this scenario or this symptom is something that the CPU load average exceeding the CPU cores. So what is happening? So how can this happen? That is the CPU load average exceeds the CPU core. So when the CPU load average consistently surpasses the number of CPU cores in our system, that is a clear indication that the CPU might be overloaded or it can potentially lead to performance bottlenecks. So let's see that through an example today. So we are having an online gaming application and the platform is experiencing rapid user growth resulting in increased demand. So we have decided to monitor the CPU performance to ensure optimal performance during the peak hour. So for example, we started to notice the gradual increase in CPU load over the past few days. So for example, at the very first point of time, the CPU are working fine, but after a certain point of time, there's a gradual increase. So for example, it can be 30 a day and then it can be 40 and then it can be 50 each day and it keeps on increasing. So here you can see they are very steady and normal. But in this scenario, if the CPU usage, so for example, even during your load test, the CPU usage percentage, if it gradually increases, even for the past few minutes, so which means that the number of processes waiting for CPU time are consistently exceeding the total number of CPU cores in their server. So this is the representation of it. So for example, our server has 8 CPU cores, but the load average has been hovering around 10 for the past few hours. So that means that we are exceeding the CPU capacity and that will definitely cause bottleneck. So with the CPU load average surpassing the number of cores, the server struggles to keep up with the incoming request, which will lead to performance issues during busy period. So this is another example of how the CPU monitoring, I mean the monitoring of the CPU percentage will help you. So we saw some of the examples like how does or what are the symptoms of the CPU usage percentage during the load test. So with that I come to an end. We will walk through another CPU or memory metric in our next video. Until then, it's bye bye from Vasan Shanmugam and Littlest Law.